So this is Oxford Strategic Consulting research into the Gulf Arab leadership style, and really summarises why we think our approach is A, specifically suited to the GCC, and B, fairly unique. So the purpose of the project originally was to define the Gulf Arab leadership style, not necessarily as it's practiced in every case, but as it's espoused by Gulf leaders. And this is exactly the same as if we talk about the American leadership style or the Japanese leadership style. It's not necessarily how they actually lead, but it's how they believe they should lead. So it's their espoused leadership style. Alongside this, we also did a project for Saudi Aramco on human resources in the GCC, which was interesting and identified the unique characteristics of HR across the region. And then we also did a case study with a traditional GCC family firm who had employed a new Western HR director and looked at the differences between the Gulf leadership style and best practice global HR. And that's referenced in a case study which is available. So we interviewed about 50 senior leaders in terms of the Gulf leadership style, and we also interviewed about 200 line and HR managers. And on the case study, we were in the company for about 6 weeks looking in detail. So demographics more or less follows the populations of the country, although we've probably got a few more in the UAE than one might have expected. And in terms of the sectors, we covered all the sectors, large and small companies, mostly GCC nationals, which was fine, and a good range of ages. We did actually interview some women, but as a proportion extremely low. But there are some females leading Gulf organisations. So what causes the Gulf leadership style? What are the things that make a difference? What are the factors that affect or impact the Gulf leadership style? These are the things that people talked about. The first area was religion, and this was to do with what the Quran says about the value of work, business and profit, ethics, and treating others with respect. So the Quran is very business oriented in some ways, and leadership. The trading history of the Gulf, where the Gulf leaders are very used to extremes of boom and bust, with oil prices in all directions, the pearl industry going broke at one point in time, and trade has always been crucial for the Gulf, and they've always had a higher foreign population. So for example in Dubai there's always been a big Iranian population trading, so they're very used to different sorts of populations. There's the influence of the tribal culture, Bedouin culture, obviously the harsh desert life creates some things, and family and tribal loyalty. One of the points they made quite often was that this tribal culture encouraged curiosity and perseverance, which is quite interesting. Many of them claim there's an innate personality of Gulf Arab leaders, which is to do with modesty, restraint, and a sense of perspective and nurturing other people. And the final point they mentioned, which we think is extremely important actually, is that normally businesses and families are highly interrelated. So business goals are obviously often actually family goals. So these were the determinants, the main determinants as reported by the interviewees of the Gulf leadership style. In terms of itself, what are the components? These were the top items that were mentioned. And the top four there are leading as head of the family, so they treat the company as a family, and they act as the father, or in some cases the mother, of that family, and they have the same obligations as a parent would to the family and as family members would to the parent. And this is a traditional family, a Gulf family, so a great deal of respect for the father, etc. The second area was treasuring time, which is an interesting one. So Western expats often talk about time in the context of the Gulf leadership style in a derogatory fashion. What's been said to us is that time drives the priorities of Western models, whereas in the Gulf Arab leadership style, priorities drive my time. So if I wake up in the morning and there's something very important to do, that will drive what I do that day, rather than something that happens to be pre-scheduled. I think David mentioned that this is explained also by the fact that the Gulf people tend to live in the moment rather than in the past or in the future. So they're not thinking about what comes next necessarily, they're living whatever comes now, which is actually very related to a kind of new but well-respected concept in the West called mindfulness, which again suggests that people should spend much more attention to what they're doing at the moment rather than thinking too much about what they're going to be doing or what they were doing. And there's a whole body of literature on mindfulness, and in fact it's just been recommended by the UK government as a way of increasing well-being. Third one, building lasting relationships. So relationships are extremely important in the Gulf leadership style. One guy said to me in one of the interviews that whereas you Westerners will count your money at the end of the month, I'll count my relationships and who I've met and who I've got on with and that kind of thing. So relationships are very important. And then the fourth one, creating bold visions. So in terms of strategy, the Gulf Arab leader doesn't tend to do detailed planning or strategy because number one, they live in the moment, and number two, anything can happen in the future because it's largely to do with Allah or fate or other people. So today is the most important thing, but a vision is very important, i.e. where you really want to get to. This actually, curiously enough, has got some good relationships with another very well-respected body of literature on strategic intent, which suggests that companies and organisations should have a vague intention of where they want to get to, and then decisions will be made in line with that intention. But you shouldn't necessarily do detailed planning because things are obviously going to change. So that's very similar to strategic intent. So if we summarise it, these are the main components, and the figures there are their significance and relationships, all very high. So we had a great deal of correlation between what people said, and a great deal of reliability in the data. I won't go into the stats at the moment. Just looking at building lasting relationships, these are the kind of things they said, and there's a couple of quotes, but basically they're important in all aspects of life, including business, and the power of these relationships is what sets them apart. So they actively look for relationships, they operate in a manner which builds trust in others, they're honest at all times, respect other people's views, invest time in relationships, spend a lot of time at work on relationships rather than work per se, value loyalty extremely, operate a person-oriented approach to business, and try to manage conflict, but actually that's largely to do with avoiding conflict, to be honest. So that's some details of that one. So in terms of implications for the way people would manage their people, or what we would call human resource management, interesting quote is, if you have loyal and committed people as part of your company family, then performance will take care of itself. So you don't need to manage performance per se, you just need to manage loyalty and commitment. Capability, i.e. an expertise, isn't necessarily the most primary attribute in looking for people or working with people. Loyalty and relationship are probably more important. If you were going to do appraisals and reward, you'd probably focus on loyalty and motivation and much less on achievement of objectives. Smart objectives, a guy said to me, they don't make any sense. Each person should do what they can every day to achieve the vision in the best way they can, personally or supporting the organisation and its head. So you shouldn't worry too much about detailed objectives. Dismissal is very difficult in a family business, especially in terms of people that are seen as in your group. So it might be relatively straightforward to dismiss, for example, an expat possibly, who hasn't worked for you for very long, but you'd find it very difficult to dismiss either a long-term loyal expat or indeed a national. Job descriptions should be loose, so the person can do whatever's needed to achieve the vision. But on the other hand, achievement is largely due to fate, collective action, and is very much unpredictable. So actually achievement is not necessarily to do with you as an individual so much as it might be in the West. So those are some implications for performance and reward areas of HR. In terms of resourcing, recruitment's a tool to build relationships with loyalty as a key criteria. So me employing somebody that somebody else recommends to me is perfectly reasonable because I'm trying to build a relationship. Resource planning, very loose because you can't predict the future. You're aiming for a vision rather than a plan, and so therefore you need people to be able to be moved around. So roles can be created to fit a person, not just a task. Leadership is generally seen as a natural ability because whoever happens to be the leader is just fate. So you happen to be able to lead people. It's not necessarily trained. Recommendations are very important in terms of recruitment and talent planning. And actually visioning, fatalism and relationships are quite a healthy attribution style because setbacks are not seen as personal failures, but success is seen as a shared reward or a shared achievement. Okay, so that's some possible implications for HRM. These are just examples. Strengths and weaknesses. So the potential weaknesses really are task and project deadline management are not strong applying the Gulf leadership style. Tough decisions, difficult conversations, very tricky with the Gulf leadership style because of this focus on relationships. Very difficult to manage conflict effectively because it will tend to be hidden. And driving individuals or ambition in individuals is slightly tricky because of the fact that success is not seen as due primarily to individual effort. So that's very different to, say, Western styles. In terms of advantages or strengths, very strong on setting a vision, not just a commercial vision, but also something that gets the buy-in from people, generating engagement and enthusiasm, flexible if things change, which they always do, and creating loyalty and responsibility. So those are the strengths and weaknesses. So what we need to do is to either combine best practice leadership style, which has largely been developed in the West, with some of the advantages of the Gulf Arab leadership style, particularly in terms of the terrible engagement scores that are generally created by best practice leadership at the moment, whereas the Gulf Arab leadership style could add quite a lot. Or we need to make sure that people are in the right kinds of roles. So ironically enough, this might suggest that roles like the chairman role, which are more strategic, more visionary and less to do with tasks, might well be suited to Gulf Arabs, whereas middle management roles where you're actually trying to achieve things within given timescales might be better suited to expats. So if we didn't have enough nationals, maybe they should be running things at the top, but not necessarily doing the middle management jobs. That's very controversial. But, Okay, so one could be leading organisations, one could be leading projects. So the initial proposition was that there is a distinct Gulf leadership style. It's actually a sub-style within other collective type leadership styles, so it's got some application in other areas, not just the GCC. It's got huge implications for effective human resource management, which means that human resource management is cultural. It's potentially extremely valuable in generating engagement, but it has got weaknesses which could be mitigated by bringing in some best practice as well. In future research, we want to carry out large-scale semi-structured interviews, which we're carrying on with, possibly a volume survey, and look at some existing models of culture, which we haven't done so far. And is there such a thing as a blended or even a situational style?